As people are joining in, good morning or hello. We'll get started in just a minute once our participant numbers level off a little bit. And don't mind us as we chat a little bit, getting ready. Exciting. I'm getting mesmerized looking where everyone's coming from. All right. Well, good morning, everyone from Charlottesville, Virginia in the United States. Good afternoon or good evening to many of you, and in fact, to several of our panelists as well. My name is Danielle Culpepper, and I am, as the chair of the IFLA, which is the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions. So I'm the chair of the IFLA Rare Books and Special Collections Standing Committee, and it is very much my pleasure to welcome you to the webinar, Rare Books and Special Collections, Adapting to a Global Pandemic. The IFLA Rare Books and Special Collections Committee has continued its work on several fronts during the course of the pandemic, including a number of projects. An ongoing collaboration with the International League of Antiquarian Booksellers, with a forthcoming, we hope, co-hosted session on collecting during the pandemic. We've completed competency guidelines for rare book and special collections professionals, which we will have translated into a number of IFLA languages, and for which we expect to develop tips for implementing the guidelines in different contexts. And finally, we're also working on international guidelines for rare materials cataloging, with hopes to host a new conference on rare materials description within the next few years, pandemic permitting. Today's webinar actually builds on a Knowledge Cafe discussion session at the 2019 IFLA World Congress in Athens that was titled, "So You Run a Special Collections Reading Room," which centered on planning or managing a rare books reading room. Today's session now considers what it means to manage a rare books library during a global pandemic, something which many of us are learning on the job day by day. Before we get started, and here, Meg, you can go ahead and advance the slide. I'd like to say a few words just about housekeeping and privacy matters. Please note that the webinar is being recorded, and that does include the chat and question and answer functions. So you may think you're sending a private note to a colleague you see on the webinar, but that is in fact being pulled into the recording, so it won't remain private. Audience microphones will remain muted during the session, but we encourage you to continue using the chat for your comments or to share your experiences, and to type any questions that you might have for the panelists in the Q&A box. We will hold off on audience questions until the end of the session, just to make sure we have time to get through what we have prepared. But we will make time for your questions, and we will help feed those questions to the panelists to make sure they can respond. So now I'd like to ask my committee from the Standing Committee, Meg Phillips, to introduce our panel of speakers and to start our program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Danielle. My name is Meg Phillips, and I'm the External Affairs Liaison for the United States National Archives and Records Administration. I'm also a member of the Rare Books and Special Collections Standing Committee on behalf of the National Archives, and I'll be serving as the moderator of today's discussion. I'm talking to you today from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The idea for this webinar grew out of discussion among the members of the Rare Books and Special Collections Standing Committee, meeting by Zoom to try to continue the work of the section when we couldn't meet in person. We realized that our community had special concerns related to operating during the pandemic because of the nature of our rare and unique collections and the types of users we serve. Of course, IFLA also provided an unusual opportunity to compare and contrast the experiences of colleagues doing similar work in countries and institutions with widely varying experiences. Finally, it seemed that our section might be able to help other rare books and special collections librarians and archivists to identify best practices, or at least good practices, that are starting to emerge. We're all in the same boat, trying to find ways to continue to care for our collections, serve our users, and keep everyone healthy and safe while COVID-19 is rampant. So that's the goal of today's event. We want to share information from a few well-respected institutions about how rare books and special collections libraries are adapting to the pandemic. But we also want to hear from you about what you and your colleagues are doing. Please feel free to use the chat function to share your stories and the practices that have emerged at your institutions over the past year. We want this webinar to be a forum for all of us to share what we're doing. If you share your stories using chat, we can leave the question and answer function for questions that you want to submit to our panelists. So our program today is very simple. After just these few words of introduction, I'll invite our panelists to introduce themselves a little more fully, and then we'll kick off discussion. After around half an hour of discussion among the panelists, we'll open the floor to questions from the audience and invite the panelists to respond to those. Just before our hour is up, our section chair, Danielle, will come back to close the webinar. With that, let's meet our panelists today, all of them current members of the IFLA Rare Books and Special Collections Section Standing Committee. Adelaida, can we start with you?
Hello, my name is Adelaida Caro. I'm head of Rare Books at the National Library of Spain, which is in Madrid.
Yes, and my name is Sjökvist, and I'm curator of books at the Uppsala University Library in Sweden.
Okay, my name is Makeswary Periasamy. I am the Rare Books librarian at the National Library of Singapore, which is part of the National Library Board that manages the National Library, the National Archives, as well as 26 public libraries.
My name is Stephanie Stillo. I am a Rare Books curator in the Rare Books and Special Collections Division at the Library of Congress, which of course is located in Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, everyone. And thank you to all the panelists for being willing to share your experiences with the global community here. Now, let's find out what happened at all of your institutions over the last year. And we're going to start with a pretty basic question about literally what happened in your institution. If your library shut down at any point over the last year, how and when did it shut down? And if it didn't shut down, how did you operate? Adelaida, can we start with you again?
Okay, of course. Well, in Spain, everything happened very fast. The library shut down for patrons on March the 12th. The day earlier, the schools had shut down. It was the first step. And just a week earlier, we were having normal life. We even celebrated the 100th anniversary of our Sala Cervantes, a reading room for rare books and manuscripts at the National Library, with activities and visits. And a week later, we had to shut down for patrons. A day later, the president declared a curfew and the general lockdown that lasted for almost 2 months. It was a shocking experience.
Yeah.
Peter, do you want to go next? You've had an unusual experience.
And since I represent Sweden, I'm probably the only one here who has experienced that. Well, we never had a full lockdown in our country, and our library has always been open to some degree all the time. And that is true also for the special collections and the special reading room. Our basic strategy has been to facilitate so that everyone can keep distance at the library. So we cannot help all the patrons with everything, but as long as we have a good distance, they are welcome to the library. Yeah, and I will show some pictures of how it looks at our library as well later. Yeah.
Thank you. Magus, what about Singapore?
Okay, for Singapore, what happened is it was actually a nationwide initiative to encourage people to work from home. So we had library closures on April 7th. And initially it was supposed to be until May, but what happened was because the situation was not improving, so we finally opened only on July 1st, 2020. Yeah.
Thank you. And Stephanie.
Yeah, so the Library of Congress closed to the public on March 12th. The initial response was to just limit staff, but managers still had to come in to the library. And so it took us a moment to realize that we were going to have to shut down to the point of just essential staff. And so, you know, that took a few weeks to realize. You know, as it was interesting though, like as soon as our doors closed, we started, you know, planning for re-engagement, which was sort of fascinating, which I'm sure we'll talk about later today. We've remained closed to the public, but we're currently in phase 2 reentry for staff. So that means that we can have up to 50% of staff and contractors on site, but that is not the reality in terms of the actual percentages that are on site at the moment. We remain closed to the public, but our first step towards reentry in September, we launched a temporary electronic resource center that was all by appointment, and that provided access to rights restricted content, e-resources, things like that. It was a very managed space. Unfortunately, we had to shut that down in January due to some of the protests that were happening on the Capitol complex. So it remains closed at this point, but that was sort of our first step into the reentry process. So we're kind of in that middle ground.
Thank you. So I think this is maybe not for Peter, but for everybody else. Were your staff able to work from home? And if they were working from home at any of that, during any of that time, what kinds of projects were they working on? And actually, I should include Peter as well, because maybe staff were sometimes working at home. So feel free to answer. Yeah.
Yes.
Adelaida, why don't we start with you?
Okay, yes. Most of us were able to work from home, but it took a while till we could do it more or less normally. As I said at the beginning, the National Library of Spain didn't expect this. We never thought we were going to close. And not many people were teleworking at the time of the shutdown. So the library had little licenses for telework. A lot of informative work had to be done till we could have a virtual access to our PCs and do more or less normal work that didn't have to do with being physically in the library. So it took a couple of weeks, but then most of us really had a lot of work to do. We realized there are many tasks that we didn't expect we could do at home, but we could. For instance, we could ameliorate many records, authority records. We work on provenance projects, researching about ancient possessors, ancient bindings. The library has a big digital collection, so we were able to work on crowdsourcing projects, dissemination of the collections, and many more.
Thank you. Let's just keep rolling through the same order. And Peter, you were giving me a thumbs up. So would you like to speak to whether staff were working at home at all?
Absolutely. And I saw a question in the chat here about whether we have thought about virtual ways of connecting to our patrons and so on. And that is, of course, true. I mean, from what my description, it perhaps sounded like it was business as usual, but that is absolutely not the case. I mean, most of the staff is working from home at the moment, and we prioritize to help people, of course, via the computer or Zoom or telephone or whatever, so on and so on. And yeah, so much has changed. And I don't remember your initial question. I was so focused on that chat question. What was it?
The original question was, were staff able to work at home? And if so, what kinds of projects were they working on from home?
Yes. And in our case, when we talk about the special collections, we have a huge backlog of, this is an example only, but we have a huge backlog of old catalogs that need to go into the computer. I mean, so, and that is actually something you can do from home. And there are several other, you know, things that people have been able to work with from home. I mean, answering a telephone, you know, when they call the library, you can do that from home, of course. And in fact, we had planned at Uppsala to celebrate 400 years in 2020 and 2021, but much of that has been cancelled, of course. But still, we are preparing a volume, a book, and many of us are able to, yeah, write articles from home, of course. Yeah. So some examples.
Thank you. I do see a comment that that you're having trouble seeing the speakers, and you should have local control over your display. So try looking in the upper right corner at the view option and see if that gives you a better view of the speakers. Magus, would you like to tell us more about what you were doing in terms of whether staff could work at home in Singapore?
Yeah, sure. Actually, working from home was a bit of a kind of a culture shock initially, because staff and the customers, library customers, were so used to having the libraries open for a certain period of time. So when this happened, and the government's initiative, the policy was that only certain crucial industries had to have people be on site. So we had to scramble to do a lot of things and planning. For the librarians, it was easier because we had research and reference work to follow up on. And our email reference inquiry was still operating. So we had to answer inquiries, but of course we couldn't offer physical resources for them to look at. We had to check, we had to offer more of the e-resources. And this was also a time we took to look at policy reviews. And at the same time, we were also already doing promoting collections. You know, we were actually doing videos and social media write-ups, you know, and YouTube videos on collections that are digitized and which could be featured on social media. So we just continued with that. And for the librarians, we used to have this monthly series of 1-hour talks by librarians called Librarians World. It's been happening for about 3 years now. And that too moved online. And our engagement team then came out with this new series called Librarians at Home, where they tried to feature a particular librarian who will film himself or herself from home. And they will ask a few questions of the librarians about the kind of work they're doing in the library, and perhaps they can talk about some of the library materials they are working with. It was tougher for the paraprofessionals, you know, those people who whose work are more operational and mainly done on site. So we had to come up with what you call special projects. And as Peter was saying, that we actually had to look at work, those backlog work, which usually don't get done during other times because of other demanding work tasks. So what we did was we asked them to look at these digitized collections and ask them to clean up those broken links, and as well as cleaning up the holdings information in the library management system. And we had launched web archiving project a few years ago. So the paraprofessionals were asked to help with that. And importantly, all of us were asked to help with the COVID-19 documentation as we go about our jobs and all that. And another more important thing is, I think staff were also sent for retraining and asked to do a lot more, what they call online courses. So basically we had time to, we had to plan the work in such a way that that they can be occupied meaningfully, but we also have to be aware or mindful that a person cannot be working from 9 to 5 as per normal from their office, and we should give allowance that sometimes they don't have any work to do, and that's all right. during this period. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Yeah, so our staff pretty quickly transitioned to telework. I have to say, this was a massive success story for the Library of Congress. Before COVID, we had very minimal telework capability. So it meant that we had to deploy fleets and fleets of equipment to thousands of employees very quickly. We had to expand a massive security network because we are connected to Congress. And so this was a really, really incredible, nimble experience to be a part of at the library. So I think the experience of telework is very different depending on who you are in the library. And certainly that's been true in our division. So our management has pivoted pretty substantially towards robust reporting of what we're doing to our funding bodies, which I'm sure that we all have that. So we have to, not being on site means that we have to prove staff activity, which is one long data call after another. But for our reference staff and our curatorial staff, and it's lovely to see these connections between all of us, it's been this time to sort of dig into projects that often have to be put on the back burner because we have such a demand by patrons that are right in front of us, right? And so the examples are very similar, I feel like, at the Library of Congress as they have been to other institutions of, our medievalist has been updating our catalog records for our manuscript collection and has been engaging in new ways with things like fragmentarium, which has been really exciting for us. We launched a huge collection discovery project where we looked at, like what Peter was saying, we looked at publications from the 19th century onward to be able to add to our collection records and create sort of robust searchable databases, working on our virtual programming. Our provenance research as well is fantastic. And we've really been able to dig into that. Several LC publications that staff are working on. We've been able to tackle some of those pesky problems of like shifting in your stacks, that you're often not able to do, but just that kind of like grunt dirty work has also been something that we've been able to engage with. So I feel like it's been a huge success story for us, but also productivity now is very different than what it was previously, right? And that's something that we're constantly grappling with.
Thank you. Even though I'm the moderator, I'm also participating in this world, and the U.S. National Archives had a very similar experience to everyone else's, where we actually did have, Stephanie and I've talked about this, we used telework more than the Library of Congress did. So we already had some staff who were well set up to work from home, but clearly not everyone. A lot of people are very closely tied to the materials. And so we had to change our expectations, all of our work plans, but we were able to do fantastic work on the catalog and on crowdsourcing and a lot of professional development. So we made a very similar shift. We also deployed laptops or tablets to all staff during the course of the year. We got special funding from the government in order to do that, which we appreciated very much. So thank you, everybody. So we've had some questions that I think are getting at our next question that we want to discuss, which is, did your library experiment with or shift to new forms of public programming online? Can you talk about what kinds of things you offered digitally, particularly anything that you tried that you hadn't done before? Adelaida, would you like to start this time again?
Yes, the National Library of Spain normally hosts many exhibitions, normally 3 at a time, 3 times a year. It's a lot of exhibitions that we have at the library. And during this period of lockdown, the people in charge of exhibitions developed many virtual visits, both to current exhibitions and to former ones who have been recorded but not displayed as virtual visits. I think that was the most important change.
Thank you. How about you, Peter?
Yes, and I guess this is the same for everyone here in this group as well, that most of us have changed everything to Zoom nowadays. So we have, for instance, had some national seminars concerning special collections that were meant to take place physically, that we meet on Zoom instead. And I would say, I mean, it's only a small part. Of course, we work with social media all the time, and we do digital exhibitions and so on. But that has not really changed because we were already doing that. I would say that the big thing is this big shift to using online meetings. And I'm sure it will stay as well, because we have noticed that there are actually some benefits with using it. Not always, but many times. Yeah.
Thank you. Magus, how about you?
For us, it was similar to Peter and Adelaida's. I think most of the libraries would have shifted their programs online. So for us, because we were also already conducting certain programs online. It's just happened that everything moved online. You know, things like the talks, the Librarian monthly series of talks, you know, those even featuring external speakers, everything moved online. And the good thing about this is of course, the audience reach was wider. You know, you don't have to have people come just to the library to listen to the folks, and you can also listen to the recording after that. And interestingly, we also had digital storytelling. Even storytelling moved online. It was called digital storytelling, or e-storytelling. I can't remember what it was called. So basically, then they started coming up. They started pushing a lot of things to YouTube, and interestingly, they even started to use TikTok to promote a YouTube video on publicizing a rare collection. They used TikTok to promote that video. So that was social media promoting another social media venture. So all these things were happening.
Great, thank you. And Stephanie, what about the Library of Congress?
So I do have a couple examples that I'd like to show, just because we're very proud of what we've been doing at the Library of Congress, though Magus has given me so much to think about that I'm realizing that we should be really following some of the model of Singapore. So this topic is really near and dear to my heart because we've been laying a lot of groundwork for this. So we have, if you could go to slide 12, we've completed several projects to date. So many of them are in preparation for larger releases in 2021. So some of these were sort of test cases to think about what worked and what didn't in terms of our audiences. We're also dealing, I think, with a world that's gone virtual, and at some point, and maybe even now, there's going to be a little bit of digital virtual fatigue that sets in. So we're trying to get ahead of that as well, of thinking about how do we sort of reach audiences in new ways, or maybe perhaps new ways for us. So the first thing that we did, which has already been mentioned, I think Adelaida mentioned it earlier, is capitalizing on our digital content. So as we all know, digitization doesn't always mean interaction, right? And so we were trying to find sort of these points of contact for people. So we launched our first crowdsourcing project for us, which was actually a huge technical feat. Also, it turned out, and it was a great project on these 19th century crystal gazing experiments. So we had wonderful success with this. We had folks in our division that gave talks about it. We've had about 300 transcribers, unique transcribers at this point, that have done over 3,000 pages. So it's been a great success for us. So we have another one that we're launching in the summer. If we could go to slide 13. We've been transitioning our on-site instruction of our non-digitized material into virtual settings. So we've been encouraging sort of one another to reach out to our friends groups and our special interest groups. I love this slide because this is our medievalist, Mariana, and her on-site instruction. And this is a talk that she's giving next week on a similar topic, sort of very then and now kind of thing. It's sort of simple, but I think it really demonstrates, you know, how we're transitioning all of this. If we could go to slide 14, please. Mark Diminution, our chief, and myself have been working on a huge video rollout for 2021 that's more directed towards general audiences as well. And this has been a really exploratory process for us. So, you know, how do you effectively film special collections material is a real challenge, and we're putting a lot of time and money into this. And also, you know, we are committed to training up our staff on things like filming and audio recording and video editing. And these are new skills, right, for rare books librarians. So it has been a journey, is what I will say, and but a good one. And then lastly, if we could go to slide 15, one of the things that I'm eternally grateful for is that Mark, our chief, made sure that we didn't forget the basics, which I think is really important. So he started out sending a Today in Rare Books at the beginning of the pandemic, and he has done it every single day since it started. And so we are now transitioning a lot of this into a new blog series. And so we're stockpiling content that we didn't really know. And it was all about making sure that we covered those bases. And so that was really fantastic. So we've been nicely busy, and hopefully meaning that 2021 and beyond, you know, is going to be really successful in terms of virtual content.
Thank you. And we do have a number of images, and I hope that we'll be able to share a lot of them. I do want to do kind of a time check. We've been giving fantastic answers, and I wish this webinar were 2 hours long because you have enough things to say, but we have around 10 minutes to get through 6 more questions. So let's try to just sort of hit the highlights. And if somebody else has already said very much what you have to say, just defer to them. Okay, our next question in the lineup is, did your staff learn any new skills or habits of work while working remotely that you think you're going to be able to use going forward? Adelaida, would you like to start?
I think we have learned some skills, but I still have the feeling that we need to learn more. For instance, I do telework 2 days a week, and I go to the library 3 days a week. And when I telework, in the middle of the morning, I have already like 50 emails where I'm chatting with colleagues about things we could have discussed in person in 5 minutes. I think we are not completely used to work from home, not completely used to not see the other person and show the book, show an example, ask a question. But apart from this, we have got very used to virtual meetings, for instance. I think I never attended a virtual meeting at the library before the shutdown, and that now it's most of the meetings are done this way. So I think we have learned a lot to organize our time in a different environment. I think we have learned how to focus on some tasks that we only can do at the library when we are there, and to concentrate at home on different tasks. But I still have the feeling that we can learn a lot more.
Peter, what about you?
Yeah, I would like to stress one thing that we have done that actually forced the rest of the library to work with the special collections catalogs, and we like that very much. So it was about correcting OCR scan the catalog cards actually, and it sounds boring, but we did it in on Zoom together, and we talked about what we saw, and so that was actually a way for the other librarians not working in the special collections to learn about the material and to learn about the catalogs. Yeah.
Very clever. Magus, what about you?
I think for us, it's a new environment, right? Because the online environment is very different, and we had to have meetings on Skype and on Zoom, and the most important thing is you have to be mindful that you don't unmute your speaker or at the wrong time, because people can hear your comments, offline comments. But other than that, I think being digitally savvy, and trying to make sense of the information overload. I think there was a lot of information overload during this COVID period. There were a lot of rules and a lot of new systems, like we had booking systems, and that patrons had to book the session to come in, and you had to be mindful of how to navigate that. So basically, I guess whatever skills we have in the traditional world is still applicable, but moving forward, I think it's adaptability and flexibility, and most importantly, discipline and time management, because sometimes when we work from home, we don't stop at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock. We just continue working. Yeah, so that becomes very important to me. Yeah.
The home life balance issue as well. And I also want to point out that it is late at night for Magus right now, so she's already letting work drift into her home life. Thank you, Magus. Stephanie, what about the Library of Congress?
Yeah, just very briefly. So I think one of the things that is, fundamentally changed is that, we used to have these sort of informal methods of problem solving or, moving forward with projects of that, it would just be through sort of conversations that happened, along the way. And our processes have become much more firm and atomized at this point. There's far more people involved when we want to do something. And so I think that that's something that we're getting used to at this point. In terms of learning new skills, the library has been really deliberate about doing this from the very beginning. Our digital strategy directorate that hosts the LC Labs initiated a series of staff-led workshops and these sort of learn by doing groups last summer. And it was a great success. We had hundreds of people that signed up for them, and they were all staff-led. There was no particular instructor. It was just people coming together to learn something that they hadn't really known how to use before. So working with, Python coding, or, how do you maneuver with the library's new API, or, different forms of data visualization. Like, it was a really fascinating, wonderful hands-on project. And so, there's new skills, but there's also just skills that we, kind of should have had already, or that we just haven't had time to get to, of mining data, which is kind of a complex thing for us, or, large data. And so, so those are the things that we've been kind of working with as well, that I think will have nice benefits moving forward.
Thank you. So the next question may be why half of the people joined the webinar today. We want to talk about what procedures you actually put in place if your collection is open, that are allowing you to operate safely in the COVID environment. So I know that Peter never closed. So do you want to start off talking about what procedures you have in place that you introduced this year?
Absolutely. And if you switch to slide number 5, then you can see some images from the library. Yeah. And they are actually examples of the same thing. And that was what I started my presentation with. I mean, it's all about keeping distance to everyone. So for instance, the public computers, every second one is closed. And that goes for the chairs in the reading rooms and yeah, everywhere. And the picture on the right is from the special reading room. And I don't know if you see them, but there are actually some kind of plastic protections there. Yeah, and those are of course meant to keep the distance to the people around you. And if we are asked questions or asked to do things where we cannot safely keep the distance, we avoid to do so. So that is very hard. So sometimes we have to decline when people ask us to help them with different things. And yeah, so many measures have been taken at our library. And I mean, sometimes we have limited the opening hours somewhat, because mostly, I mean, people don't come to the library as much as before. But the important thing has been, since it's a university library, the library is a very, very important place for students actually. And many of them have had a hard time during the pandemic, and to offer them some place to sit has been important, as long as they keep the distance. Yeah.
So one of the other questions that we wanted to get to, and now it's clear that we're not going to get to all the questions we wanted to ask if anyone was quarantining materials. So before we move on from Peter, is your institution doing any quarantining of materials?
No.
Okay.
We didn't.
Adelaida, what about you? No.
Yes, we reopened in June with very strict health and security measures. For instance, our seating capacity was reduced to 30% when we reopened. That lasts only 2 weeks. And then we started with 50% of the capacity, which is still how we are now. Patrons are not allowed to touch the reference collections, nor manual files. They have to request them to the librarians, and they can give them to the patrons, but they cannot touch them. It looks more or less like image 6, if you can show it, right? They have to use face masks all the time. Also, the librarians have to do this. Yes, that's more or less like how it looks like. And everything is by appointment and with advanced requests of all the materials that are going to be used in a day. So when the patron comes to the library, everything is prepared for this person at the place where this person is going to sit. And after the person leaves, everything is disinfected before the next person comes. I think that's the most important measures. We do have quarantine. We started with a quarantine of 14 days, and a couple of months later, the preservation department decided that a week was enough because there were already some studies that said the virus doesn't last for very long on paper. That's why I decided to reduce it to a week.
Thank you very much. Magus, how about you?
For us, we didn't quarantine the materials. I think what we did was we reduced the consultation hours for rare materials from 5 days a week. We made it 2 days. And of course, there were fewer people coming to consult anyway. And we also reduced the number of people who can walk into the library. It became like 50 people. And we had a system because we have a RFID system and that tracks visitorship. So we had to track, like should only be 50 people within the library reading rooms. And other than that, we also had to wear masks. And initially when we reopened, we were also encouraged to wear face shield. I think I don't have a picture here, but it was really uncomfortable, especially if you're wearing spectacles and it just keeps dropping off. And we let go of that after a month. And most importantly, what you see are hand sanitizer bottles at counters, near the lifts, had high touch points. So basically we had limited opening hours until December. And since January, we have reopened to the full operating mode. But we still allow in fewer people, especially about 100 or so. The seats are still spaced apart. And you're supposed to stand 1 meter apart. All these safe distancing measures are in, but we do not quarantine our materials at the moment.
Magus, do you have a picture you'd like to show?
I think it's in one of those slides. I can't remember what's the number.
Oh, here we go. Here we go.
Yeah, so that's the booking system. They had to queue to be allowed in, and so they had to go online to the website, or there's a mobile app. They have to go in and register themselves. And if there are fewer people who registered, then you can have walk-ins. If not, only the registered ones can come into the library. So we are still following this, even though it's considered phase 3 now, and the libraries have opened to their full operating hours.
Thank you. Stephanie, can you answer briefly? We're going to have to kind of revisit how to hit the highlights as we move on.
Completely. So just very quickly, ours is completely theoretical at this point because we haven't reopened. We are under the direction of Jake Nadal, who's our preservation director. He's fantastic. If you're interested in what the LC is doing or how we're researching the Realm project, the OCLC Realm project is something that we've been deeply involved in. And if anyone's interested in that, I can connect us to the right people to talk to you about that, which is really, honestly, not me, quite frankly. There needs to be a deeper body of knowledge to talk about that than I have. So yeah.
Excellent. So what I'd like to do now is shift to responding to some of the questions from the audience, since we definitely want to engage, and there have been a number of good questions coming in. However, there were questions that we wanted to ask the group, ask the community, ask each other about how you decided to reopen, whether there are parameters that you set, and if there are lasting changes that you think are going to affect this community going forward. So I'd like to invite everybody to enter into chat what your own institutions are thinking about these issues, and whether there are broader lessons learned that you'd like to see the entire community learn from as we move forward. And our speakers, of course, can incorporate those points as they answer other questions as well. So Danielle, would you like to introduce some of the questions that came in through our Q&A function?
Sure, and it's a long list, and I'll probably try to see if I can group like questions together here. But one of the questions I wanted to start with is really open to all of the panelists, although the specifics of it are addressed to Adelaida. Let's see, I'm particularly interested in the Sala Cervantes collection from the BNE. Have you fostered in any manner the digitalization of special collections so that more volumes could be reached online? And if so, which collections have been the priority according to what criteria? So I think we could easily extend that to all of our panelists to talk about to what extent they were able to expand the opus of materials available online, how they made those prioritizations while working during this kind of crazy time. Adelaida, would you be willing to start us?
Sorry, I was mute. Yes, we are planning to expand our digital collections. The first step is that we need the budget for it, and we still don't have enough money to digitize our extremely big collection of manuscripts and early printed resources. The National Library has been working on this for more than 10 years. We already have a big digital library, but we are aware that many manuscripts have been digitized and not so many early printed resources. We are going to work on this year. After the summer, we are planning to digitize a lot of material, and it's always difficult to decide what to prioritize. 16th century is always there as a possibility, as they are the oldest older monographic resources. Some special collections that have to do, for instance, with ancient owners that make the collection particularly interesting. There are many possibilities. But as I said, we will probably, after the summer, start digitizing those.
I think many of us too are subject to sort of the schedule that we already have for digitization. And I don't know how much room all of us have for sort of new projects. I think like the question, because like Adelaida said, it's always about funding, right? And so I think for a lot of us, it's a question of how do we pivot into using what we have and what is already in the schedule in sort of a new way, right? And that becomes part and parcel of like digital programming as well. So, you know, there's only sort of so much digitization that we can do without extended funding, which I don't know that any of us are getting right now.
Yes, and for Uppsala, the situation is exactly the same as what Stephanie said. So that is basically why we have focused on this material to work with the catalogs, that the digital catalogs, to enhance the digital access that way, because digitization demands planning and money and so on. Well, you know it.
All right, thank you very much. Let's see here. I have another question. Sorry, my question screen is jumping around here. Question I was about to read. Okay, staff well-being has been a huge issue at the moment during the pandemic, and there's been a lot of stress and burnout for everyone. What have you or your libraries been doing to support your staff, their well-being and their safety at this time?
Can I start with that one? Because our library, the management, the direction of our library was quite generous, actually. So they allowed us 1 hour every day for physical exercise on working time. Since we are working from home so much, and you don't go to work and you're sitting at home. So 1 hour every day, we're allowed to take a walk or do some physical exercise or so on.
Okay, perhaps I can add. I mean, I like Peter's idea of exercising for 1 hour, but we didn't get that. What we got was they had this coffee break on Wednesdays for about half an hour, and we just joined for just a chit chat session. It's like you join, you just gather at the water cooler and talk. So they had a virtual coffee break. Sorry, no coffee or tea was drinks offered, but it was really nice to catch up with colleagues, because we missed intermingling, or the camaraderie of being in the office and chit-chatting with them. So that's one thing they offered. And they also sent us emails on mental health consultations, that if we ever have problems during this period, because they realized that a lot of folks can get a bit of depression or mental health issues. So they actually sent us emails, and we already had a counselor outside of the organization. So they actually reminded us that we can approach these people. And basically, that's about it, yeah, for us.
One of the things I think that we have seen is that, you don't really realize how much your job makes you feel tethered to the world in some ways, right? And so, so the library has been really good about virtual meetings and Slack groups and individual check-ins. I have a colleague that sets up time in my schedule as hallway meetings, because we miss running into each other just in the hallway. And so I think being just conscious of that there is such a human element to this. And in terms of staffing as well, I think, one of the things that we've been really realizing about our staff that's been brought into high relief with all of this is that they have these amazing skills that don't necessarily attach directly to their job description, and allowing them to, be productive in a new way has been really rewarding for everyone, and has kind of helped them feel, I think, more grounded and stable and connected. And so that is, I'm glad that someone brought that up, because there's such a human element to all of this that, you have to pay attention to.
One additional question is pretty broad. Can members of the panel talk about how what they've been doing, or how they've adapted their approaches to instruction and teaching during the pandemic? And some of you touched on this, of course, a bit earlier, but if you have any more thoughts.
Maybe I can say something. The National Library of Spain had some platforms that have to do with reusing digital information. And so, and one of them is called BN Escolar. It's like the Spanish National Library for schools. And we launched many projects there that were very well accepted by teachers and so on, using different learning institutions to help teachers who were also working from home for children and teenagers who were attending school from home. So that was something that the library did specifically for this. We also worked a lot on crowdsourcing projects, and many researchers participated on them.
I think one of the things that we've been trying to do, our online instruction, right now we're using, the technology that sort of exists with, WebEx and Zoom and things like that. I mean, one of the things that we're trying to sort of constantly keep in mind is that, virtual learning is iterative and dynamic. And so I think we're trying to be more creative and, quite frankly, like more brave about how we do things and put things out into the world, and maybe a little bit more experimental. And so that's something that I think is a kind of a silver lining to all of this that hopefully won't go away. There's certainly specific examples, but I don't want to like take up time, but there's but I think that is certainly part of it, is that it's sort of this iterative process of figuring that out.
All right. Meg,
If I can say something very quickly about the National Archives. Oh yeah, maybe one more.
Okay.
But I wanted to just put in a plug for Docs Teach, which is the National Archives program for teaching with primary sources. And it's really geared to educators in the K through 12 space. And it was already this online platform for developing lesson plans and teaching and learning from home. And it has turned out to be really popular and really exactly what this moment needed. And so they have been able to really run with that program and offer a lot of training to educators and also to, just parents who are trying to suddenly educate their kids at home. So it's been an interesting transition here. So we probably do need to start wrapping up. We committed to ending on time. What I would like to suggest is that the Rare Books and Special Collections section does have a blog, and we are really interested in all of the chats and all of the questions that have come in. We're aware that we did not touch on everything we really hoped to touch on. And I think this is such a useful dialogue for this community that what I propose is that we follow up this discussion and try to address some of the questions we didn't get to in either one or several blog posts in the coming days. So monitor the Rare Books and Special Collections website and its blog, and we will see if we can keep this discussion going. So with that, thank you so much to all of our panelists and to the Rare Books and Special Collections section for organizing this. And with that, let me toss it back to Danielle to actually wrap us up for the evening or morning or wherever you are.
For the day. Thanks, Meg. And I'll, in the interest of wrapping up quickly, I'll kind of abandon the little mini script that I had and ask if we could actually turn to the final slide that has some of our contact information for the section. I just wanted to remind everyone that you can find more information about the IFLA Rare Books and Special Collections section on its official IFLA website. You can see the URL for that here. We also maintain our own blog, Rare and Special. You can find that URL on the screen, and that's on the blog is where we would hope to continue this conversation by responding to some of the many questions that we didn't have time to get to here. And then, of course, you can follow our social media channels as well, and you have that information. We'd be very happy to hear from you with your thoughts and your feedback, as well as suggestions regarding the types of programming that would be useful to you and useful to your colleagues in our field. As I mentioned at the beginning, we hope this spring to be able to host some additional webinars. IFLA's World Congress this summer is going to be held virtually, which might allow some people to travel or to attend who would not have been able to travel. And our business meetings at IFLA World Congress will be open to the public as well. So stay tuned, and I'm gonna just kind of thank Meg, Meg Phillips, for moderating our session. Thanks to all of our panelists. Once again, we have Adelaida, Caro, Martín, Peter Sjökvist, Magis Periasamy, and Stephanie Stillo. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us all. And thanks to all of you for attending. That concludes our webinar, and have a very good day. Bye-bye.